Hello everyone. Welcome to this RSA event, Unlocking Civic Voice. I can't see some people around here, so I'm going to go forward. It's a real privilege to have you all here this evening to discuss how the arts can serve as powerful tools for civic engagement and social change. I'm Tom Stratton, Chief of Staff here at the RSA, and before we launch into the discussion, I just wanted to take a moment to set the scene for how this discussion feeds into our work here at the RSA. So one of my main roles here is to oversee our Prosperous Places program, which is a collection of place-focused interventions done in partnership with people in places. I personally believe we're sort of living through a relatively quiet and understated revolution currently. In the UK at least, as power and monies are devolved down to people who are closer to the communities that these things are meant to serve. And our programme focuses on how places can use this opportunity to unlock prosperity and revolutionise the way in which they do three key things: make strategy, build capabilities, and strengthen social fabric. And a key thread that runs through all of that work is how we bring a greater variety of voices to the fore in shaping it. So that is why I'm particularly delighted to have these four extraordinary speakers who will tonight bring unique perspectives on how community voices can drive societal transformation. So I'm particularly pleased to welcome Josephine Burton, who is the Artistic Director and Chief Executive of Dash Arts, with whom this event has been co-created with the RSA. Finlayson is a Professor of Political and Social Theory at the University of East Anglia. Alecky Blythe is a playwright and pioneer of verbatim theatre. And Dawid Konotey-Ahulu is co-founder of, wait for it, Redington, Mallowstreet, 10,000 Interns, and Spellbound, which is all of which, well, in 10,000 Interns is a charitable foundation for arranging internships for undergraduates of either Black heritage or with a disability, but actually I think he'll tell us a little bit more about Spellbound tonight. So the plan for tonight is we're going to jump into a conversation for around half an hour, and then we're going to segue innovatively into a Q&A which will last between 20 minutes and half an hour. So do get your questions ready. We'll be taking them both from the room and online. So with no further ado, let's get into it. And I thought where we might want to start here is just unpacking a little bit about what civic voice is and what it means to our panel members. So I'm going to go to Alan first and ask, what exactly do we mean by civic voice? And I'll sort of set some boundaries around that because we could be here for a while. So how do we define it from an academic perspective? And can you just tell us a little bit about why it's so essential for democratic societies?
Sure. It's nice to be asked to give the academic perspective. I'm usually asked to not do the academic. Can I set essay questions later as well? So there's a concept that sort of comes out of economics, okay? That is a way of thinking about people's relationships to, well, anything, to organisations or brands, but also to government, which is about the difference between what they call exit, voice, and loyalty. And what that says is that often with a brand, say, we might be loyal to it, we like it, we're attached to it, maybe we think it's a great social media platform. And then if we don't like it, if it goes wrong, if someone buys it and it becomes terrible, if you can imagine such a thing, we can leave, we can exit. And there are some people who think that everything should be like that politics should be like that. If we like the health service, we can use it. If not, we can exit, and we should be free to do just that. And that's what politics, that's what freedom is about. But that forgets the third thing, which is voice. What if we had voice to engage with the thing, the company, the service, the public service, the government, to say, actually, no, this isn't working, or I've got a complaint, I've got a demand, then something else is happening. Something else is happening beyond just a simple choice to have or not have, to purchase or not purchase. Some kind of dialogue, some kind of exchange can begin thinking about what that thing is and how that thing works and how we can maybe change it to suit the different needs and interests. And what's important there, what makes it civic voice, I suppose, is it isn't just about guaranteeing any old kind of free speech. I mean, I'm all for that, but just complaining and venting, that isn't civic voice, that's just complaining and venting. Mm-hmm. And it isn't just expression, that's important, self-expression is important. It's thinking about, well, how is this thing working and how can we make it work better for all of us? Or how can we bring the different demands and complaints and issues we have, and between us, through voice, rather than fighting or just leaving, think about how we can do things better. And that might be very important for politics always, but particularly now, because if people don't feel they have that voice, if they can't express what they think isn't working and be part of a process for thinking about how to do things differently or better, they might exit. Maybe not leave the country, the rich people might, but they might just exit from the political process altogether and say, I'm done with this, I'm not participating, or I'm going to vote for that guy who looks like he's going to burn it down, if you can think of such a thing.
Yeah, I think excellent. That really, in 3 minutes, you managed to achieve a lot. That's really helpful. So, and then turning to you, Josephine, just to set the scene a little further. I wonder whether you could explain what our public house actually is and the challenges you sort of set out to address through it.
Absolutely. So I'm a theatre director and I run Dash Arts, and we at Dash Arts ask questions and then kind of big urgent questions and then try to answer them with artists and academics and community participants. And our kind of big question that we're working on at the moment is what are we in England post Brexit? What does it mean to be English? And I had the privilege of meeting Alan at a festival actually, and kind of heard a little bit about the work that he was doing, and principally that belief that he was effectively beginning to articulate, which is that we all have the voice, have the possibility to have the voice to be articulate and create a reasoned, coherent argument about what we could do that could make the future better, but we haven't necessarily got the tools. And so he said, I've got this workshop structure built on kind of classical rhetoric, like Ciceronian rhetorical structures about how do you make an argument. And I said, oh, that's interesting. If we took that structure and we went around the country and we heard from people from across the country and we helped them create and then deliver speeches about the things that they feel passionate about and what they think would make the country better, I'd get this incredible picture of who we are as a country, who we are now and who we could be, and then I could take all of that and turn it into a play. And so that's where I am right now, is sort of sitting on all of these speeches, which we'll talk about tonight, and then how that can be an expression of Englishness. So our public house is the project, but it's also going to be the product once we've written a play and put it out there in the world.
Fantastic. And so I'm going to move on to Alecky now and ask you about what civic voice means to you. And perhaps just, if you could give us a little flavour of your work and what inspired you to do that particularly.
Well, what inspired me in the very first instance was the fact that I didn't have a job. So the only reason, and I can't pretend to any grander ideals than just trying to make work for myself to perform in. And I didn't invent the technique that I use. I learned it in a workshop from a wonderful director called Mark Wing-Davey. And the way that I work is I go out with a dictaphone and I record interviews with real people. Often I go into communities which are going through some kind of event at the time, be it a riot or a serial killer on the loose, and I talk to people in the community, and I edit these interviews, and those edited interviews become the script of the play. But when I started out, it was just a way to make a play for myself. and there happened to be a siege going on up the road from where I lived in Hackney. So this was back in 2002.
Wow.
And I was like, oh, so I've got this technique of going and talking to people, and I was trying to think of a kind of good idea for like a play, you know. So my initial idea was I'm going to go and make a play about fear, find a big subject and go and talk to lots of people about this one particular subject matter.
Yeah.
So I thought, oh, okay, guy held up in a flat in Hackney, lots of like police tape, you know, cordons, loads of locals standing around having a look. That might be quite good to go and talk to people about fear, you know.
Yeah.
And it turned out to be like the longest siege in British history, and there was a hostage who escaped after 11 days, and the siege went on for 2 weeks, and you know, it kind of brought this little part of Hackney to a standstill. But of course it was pre-24-hour news, pre-social media or whatever, so there was me and the guy from the Hackney Gazette, and that was about it there, you know. Obviously these days you'd have like the world news and everything. So that's why I first went out in the first place, but I was getting so much good material that I ended up making the play about this particular siege and this community dealing with it. And then I sort of put myself in the play with the intention of trying to get an acting agent, and I ended up getting a literary agent to represent me as a writer, and, you know, forward wind 25 years, and here we are. It wasn't the plan. But that play has sort of become you know, the sort of unsophisticated version of maybe the things that I now do, you know, London Road, which took many years to make, and, you know, I collaborated with a composer, and it was a musical, and it's just a more sophisticated version of that initial play, which is really capturing the voices of a community going through an extraordinary time. And what I try to do is capture those voices as the event is taking place, which is not always easy, because you sort of got to drop everything and be like, get on a train or whatever and go, I'm going to go, and because then I can kind of get the emotional temperature of what's happening. Rather than a couple of years later where everybody's sitting down in their armchairs saying, oh yeah, we had a very exciting time a few years ago, you know. I'm like, oh, I should have been here then, you know. So I sort of try to get things as they're happening. So yeah, I've sort of ended up going in this direction, but my initial intention was just trying to get a job.
As good as any. Fabulous. And Dawid, turning to you finally, just on this particular section, your work on Spellbound focuses on equipping people with the tools to have their voice heard. And I wonder whether you might share a little about it and what drew you to focus on civic voice and public participation.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, when I started, a bit like Alecky, it was a really simple idea, a simple solution to a problem, which was that, so I'd started a firm, we advise large institutions about where to invest their money, and a few years into the life of the firm, we were hiring graduates to come in and kind of join, and they would join, and then after, the idea was that after 6 weeks, so you'd work on a big project, and then after 6 weeks, you'd present to the exec what you'd been doing for the last, for the last month and a half. And what I realized was that some of these guys and girls had done some fabulous work, but they were absolutely terrified at the prospect of standing in front of the CEO and just presenting. And so, and of course, their entire futures hinged on the outcome of this presentation. I mean, not the entire future, but you get the idea. And it was an important thing. So I thought I'd come up with a way of helping them to deal with their fears, and I came up with this 3-part program, 2 hours on a Monday night, 2 hours the following Monday, and 2 hours the Monday after that, to teach them how to get over their fear of standing up in front of a room full of people and speaking. And so I strung a bunch of movie quotes together, and it sounds like a grand speech, but it's basically, it's a bit from Goodfellas and a bit from Pulp Fiction, and you string it all together, and it sounds like this grand speech. It takes about 90 seconds to deliver. So you learn that on the first Monday. The second Monday, you learn a little bit from an Obama speech. It's very powerful, it's very presidential, and you're the 44th president of the United States. And then the final session, you tell your own story, which is, this is who I am, this is what I care about, and you've got 5 minutes to just give a talk. And by that time, you're you're over your fear, and you can stand up and you can say, this is who I am, this is what I care about, this is my vision, this is my values. And what I discovered, and it kind of worked, and so then they give their presentation and it's all fine. And that was maybe in 2012, I suppose, and since then I've done it in lots of different places, and I ended up doing it in a prison, in a couple of prisons, with guys who are doing very, very long sentences for extremely serious crimes. So they're in there for 25 years for murder kind of thing, or huge drug barons who are doing, again, very, very long sentences. These guys are locked up 23 hours a day, no prospects, nobody cares, and the future is very bleak. And someone said, would you come in and do this thing? So I went in and did the session with them, and it turns out that actually the most moving stories that I've ever heard are from some of these guys. And what I realized was that an idea that just started to try to help a few analysts and graduates to tell their story actually is proving to be one of the most powerful gifts that you can give someone, particularly someone who's never been taught to stand up and speak in public or to think about how they express themselves. There's one guy in a prison in Kent, and his name's Melvin. And there were 15 of these guys that I'd been working with over the 3 weeks. And the third week, this was the day they were going to tell their story, and they've been working on it. They're in their cells. They've got the good thing about being in prison for 23 hours out of 24. There's not many things that are good about it, but one thing is that you've got time to kind of work on things. So this is it. And I walk in to this group, and instead of 15 of them, there's 14. Melvin's not there. And so I say to the guy who's running it, who's the prison guard who's running it, are we good to go? We're waiting for Melvin. He says, well, Melvin's not going to be here because it's his birthday today. And on your birthday in this particular prison, you get allowed an extra visit, so your mum can come and your cousins and your cake. And it's for one day you can forget you're in prison and it's your birthday. And that's what Melvin's doing. So really sorry he won't be here. Really wanted to be here, but he can't be here. So I said, fine. So I'm about to start with the 14. And as we're starting, the door opens and Melvin bursts in. And he's out of breath, and he's obviously been running, and he's there. And so I kind of walked up to him and I said, Melvin, I thought it was your birthday. He said, yeah, it's my birthday, yeah, it is. And I said, well, happy birthday, but I thought you had like a visit. I thought it was the cousins and the cake and the siblings. And he said, yeah, I told them not to come. I told them not to come. And I said, but why? It's your birthday. And he said, because today is the day I tell my story, and nothing's getting in the way of that. And in that moment, I realized, and he told a very powerful story. He was in tears. His story was that his mother was very devout and religious and had prayed for him all his life, and he'd gone off the rails, hadn't listened, had ended up doing some very bad stuff. And now in prison, he'd found redemption and salvation, and he wanted to talk about it. And so he was in tears. The men are in tears. And these guys are all ripped. These are big people that you wouldn't want to bump into on a dark night. And everybody's crying. I'm crying, and everyone's crying. And then I said, well, let's sing happy birthday. So we sing happy birthday to Melvin, and we're going, happy birthday, dear Melvin. And then the guards come in because they think it's a riot because they're making so much noise. And we're like, no, we're just singing happy birthday. But in that moment, my point is, everybody has a voice. And when you give people, what I've discovered over the years is when you give people that key, then they cancel their birthday. They're like, yeah, I want this. I want to tell my story. And even if you're in prison doing 25 years, you've got a story, and everyone has a story. And so it's kind of grown from there.
Great. So the question then, certainly for us, but I think writ large really, is it's obviously hard, but what are the various processes? What can we learn from what you have done collectively in trying to start to think through what works and how we can do this more systematically? So I thought we'd spend a bit of time just getting into those processes and hearing a little bit more about them and the tangible sort of outcomes and outputs that have come as a result. So, Josephine, start off with you. Can you just tell us a little bit more about the process in those workshops, how you reach the people you want to reach, and then maybe just give us, a story maybe that sort of demonstrates the power of it?
Absolutely. So we were armed with this idea that we were going to go off and hear and listen to what people had to say and help them write and then deliver speeches. And in order to get that bigger picture of, like selfishly, if I wanted to get this picture of who we are as a country, I wanted to try to go to as diverse a kind of places across the country as we could find. So we worked with local partners. We've been in Cornwall, we've been in Sheffield, we've been in Manchester, in Norwich, and Oxfordshire, and south, like the Midlands, and like the north, east, and west, and the south coast. And we've worked with theatres often. So the Theatre Royal Stratford East and Sheffield theatres and Home in Manchester. But then very specifically worked with partners in order to reach people. So we've been into deaf communities in Manchester. We've worked with young activists. We've worked with community centres in the back, in Sheffield, in very left behind communities, and in Norwich, and every time we go in, we sort of start the day and we go in and we play games, theatre games often, to get people relaxed and playful, to create a playful community atmosphere, because it's often in that kind of space when everyone's at ease and enjoyed themselves and played a game of zip-zap boing, which is universally enjoyed by wherever we go and laughed at. And particularly Alan, who everyone always laughs at Alan because Alan always stumbles over his inability to do the zip and the zap and the boing. And that's also really humanizing in those moments. Like we all can't quite manage it, which is also great when we come in as the experts. And then slowly we go around the room, and we call it now the circle of rhetoric. We go around and say, we're going to give a speech. Everyone has the ability. We all, into kind of following up what Dawid is saying, we all have the ability to be articulate, and we all have something that we feel passionate about, and we all have an idea about what we could do better to make the world better. And we go around, and it's extraordinary actually. Every single time we've done it, we do this spiel like, you all can do it. What's the thing that we could do today that would make the future better? It doesn't need to be big. We don't need to solve world, we don't need to solve global poverty. It might just be that we all have the ability, we all should learn how to do first aid, because then if there's a problem on the street, then there's always someone on hand to sort of help out with the problem. And it's extraordinary. Every single time everybody there has something. It's really remarkable. And then over the course of the morning, we help them craft a speech based on a kind of structure that kind of articulates what the problem is, and then articulates what their suggestion of how we can solve that problem. And as Alan said, not just where it will be good for themselves to solve the problem, but how it would help all of our lives. And then we sort of go through the thing that's always the rhetorical moment when you talk to them about the refutation, which is the counter argument. Put yourself in the shoes of someone who's listening to you, convince them why that they're probably thinking it's not going to work because we haven't got enough money, and you have to sort of offset that by saying that we have to spend the money that we haven't got anyway, whatever it is. Make that rhetorical argument, and then conclude it, and we help them with the speech, and then we play with more games to help them, that sort of confidence tricks that Dawid was talking about kind of empowering people to feel that they can have the platform, they can stand in front of a room and give that speech. So we use a lot of drama tips to get them comfortable and projecting and be slightly more dynamic. And then they share the speech with us at the end of the day. So that's the sort of structure. And in terms of stories, we have now supported and helped over 450 people around the country. I've been inspired by every single one. And there's a lot of stuff around, like we've had lots of speeches across the country around the challenges of the current support for mental health around the country. I've heard a lot of people talking about the lack of support for people with neurodiversity and the waiting lists. Justice system, I get kind of regular things, and then occasionally we'll have like, we should all be buried in mushrooms because mushrooms are really sustainable. Like random wonderful moments, as well as kind of sort of the problems that face us all nationally. And then inspired by Dawid, I think I would probably say that we went into a prison just outside Manchester, a women's prison, and worked with a woman who wanted to do her speech on educational healthcare plans, and it's a neurodiversity issue. It's that we have I've learnt the waiting list for supporting people with neurodiverse challenges is immense. And she basically said, she wrote a speech saying, I had to get to prison to discover that I needed an educational healthcare plan. No one had ever supported me. I'd slipped through I'm paraphrasing, she'd slipped through the cracks of the educational system in our country, and it had only been diagnosed by the teacher in order to help give her, where she was gone to get an equivalent of a GCSE in order to get back out into the working world when she was released. And the wonderful bit of the story was that she gave that speech. It was very powerful. She was so proud of herself. We heard later that she had, as a result of that speech, she had got the grade that she needed in order to get that qualification equivalent. And we then later heard that the way that she brought herself to the process kind of helped her get early release from prison, and we then later worked with her in Manchester and gave her a platform to share that speech in front of the theatre, in front of the crowd, so she's actually given that speech now, and we've recorded her in a podcast for Dash Arts, and we're still in touch, and she's now sort of continuing her journey. So I think there's that lovely moment of sort of hearing from her, empowering her, and then giving her opportunities to be heard, which is an incredible part for me of this process.
Fantastic. And Dawid, turning to you, so with your experience of creating platforms like Spellbound, which you spoke a bit about there, what can we learn from that about what works for building inclusive opportunities for social and economic mobility, as well as the civic engagement?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've learned a huge amount, and one is that if you want this to work, you've got to capture the hearts as well as the minds. And so I have a group of young people helping me. And I'll tell you what happened was I was teaching all of these classes myself, and it's sort of it's my side of desk thing. I mean, I've got a proper actual job. This is something I sort of do on the side. And I just ran out of road. I mean, there were so many people who wanted to do this course, and so I said to a group last August, would you guys like to teach this? I don't know if it's possible, but you've just learned it. You've just done the 3 sessions. Would you do it? And they all said, yes, we'd love to do it. So this rather unlikely group of guys who, it turned out they're all young black guys working in the city. That was the particular cohort. I mean, I've actually done it with lots of demographics, but this was a particular group. Okay. So they all said they wanted to do it, and so I said, well, you've learned the speeches, you've learned them all, and we did they came around to my house, and I did a bit of the kind of the basics about how to teach it. And they came around on a Sunday afternoon, and I said, right, now what we're going to do is we're going to teach this in pairs. There were 6 of them. And so to begin with, they taught 15 new people that we'd got on LinkedIn, and we got through WhatsApp, and we got through social media generally. But 3 of them taught it together. And so we did 2 groups, 3 each. And then we did it again 3 months later, this time 3 groups of 2. And so they now taught it twice. And then the third time, we did 6 groups, basically. And so each time it just got a little bit easier. And by the time we did the third session, they'd all done it now so many times that they could kind of sort of do it standing on their head. And what was really powerful about it was one of those guys had a lot of issues and was really struggling. And when I first met him about a year ago, someone said, would you see this young guy? And I had coffee with him, and he said, look, just coming here was terrifying. The idea of coming to talk to you about my issues and my challenges, my heart was beating out of my chest. I was just so scared. And on Monday just gone, he taught one of these sessions by himself. And I said, you know how far you've come? And he said, yeah, if you'd said to me a year ago that I would stand up and I would be teaching a 3-week course to 15 people, the art of public speaking, he said, it was just never, ever going to happen. And he did it. And I think watching that happen was just an extraordinary thing. And it's taught me that people want to stand up and speak in public, I think. They just think I could never do that. There's a book called Death Came Third. I don't know whether you've read it, but someone did a survey in the States and asked people what their top 10 fears were, and death came third. Number 1 was standing up in public and speaking.
Right?
People would rather die than stand up and have to give a speech. And that's where most people are. Most people sit in the audience like, I could never do that. But actually, you can do that, and you can be taught to do it. And so we teach 5 basic principles. I say it's like learning tennis, right? It's all very well being able to have a great backhand, but you've got to also have a forehand, a serve, a volley, and everything else. And it's the same with public speaking. You've got invention. What am I going to put in the speech? Arrangement. What's the journey I'm going to take my audience on? And for that, we use Save the Cat. And if anyone's come across Save the Cat, we love Save the Cat. Most films are kind of centered around 15 points, and Save the Cat sets it all out. It's brilliant. Yeah. So Lion King, for example, follows all of them perfectly. It's the best example of Save the Cat. You've got bad guys closing in, all is lost, Dark Night of the Soul, gather the clan. It's brilliant. So we do that for arranging. Then style. Tell me a story I'm never going to forget. that whenever I see you, I'm going to remember, if you ask me 20 years from now, I'll remember the story you told, that style. Then memory, you've got to memorize your speech. No notes, don't want to see any notes anywhere. You've got to know your stuff. All eye contact. And then delivery was around eye contact and pausing and how you hold yourself. So we teach all that, and then suddenly you're equipped. You've learned stuff, and you can actually stand up and you can do it. And I guess what I would say is you need passion. You need to show people why are you learning to do this thing. And then slowly, as they do it, it's like discovering. It's like a child discovering it can walk, or it's like discovering you can swim, or you can ski, or you can do anything. That self-actualization that comes from telling the story piece is huge. And I think it's the point Josephine was making, is that when you tell your own story, there's a discovery of who you are. What do I really care about? I say be vulnerable, be passionate. Don't tell me a story I'm just not interested in. Make me sit on the edge of my seat. When I want to hear your all is lost moment. I want to be there with you in the room. And they bring it. And sometimes we're crying. I mean, the stories that people tell when you give them that key is an incredible thing. So I think it's about passion, authenticity, and giving them the tools. And when you do that, amazing things happen.
Yep, fantastic. So, Alecky, perhaps you could just give us a bit of a flavour of your listening and participative processes when working with individuals and communities. And perhaps if you mentioned the Hackney riots, but if there's anything that sort of, stood out to you over the course of the last 25 years as being a voice or set of voices that you've elevated that are particularly memorable.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose the ones that stood out are the ones that have ended up being the central characters in the play. That's kind of how I suppose I kind of craft the story, because what I'm trying to do, I'm trying to capture people's voices, but I'm also looking for a story. And I don't really know what that story is at the very beginning. So I just have to sort of cast my net very wide, and I sort of start off talking to everybody, as many people as I can, thinking, oh, am I going to go in this direction, or am I going to go in this direction, or and a lot of it is about having a rapport. I'll have a certain rapport with somebody, that you might have a certain rapport with somebody. You've got to kind of click with people. There's all that kind of thing going on. Yeah, it's slightly kind of having an instinct. So I could talk a little bit about how I kind of crafted London Road, maybe, which was the story of the community of Ipswich really forming after the murders of the 5 sex workers back in 2006. And the reason I went down there in the first place was I was making a play about a group of women in a brothel nowhere near Ipswich, in another part of the country. And I'd been recording their stories over about a year. And then these women started being found dead in Ipswich, sex workers. So the women that I was talking to in this brothel were like, you should be in Ipswich. That's where the story is about sex work at the moment. And I was like, no, my story is about you. And they were all trying to they were looking for love, and they were building their own little business. And, it was more of a domestic setting. Anyway, obviously the news, it was sort of devastating, and another woman was found dead, and another woman, and I thought, so I thought, okay, I'll go to Ipswich just to see if there's anything there to feed into this story set in the brothel, and then I'll know. If I don't go, I don't know, and I've missed my opportunity. And so I went off to Ipswich, and I wasn't really talking to sex workers there because most of them were not going out to work, thank God, because they were really the main targets. But what I was capturing was something quite different, and I was talking to basically women who were out shopping who were very scared, or men who felt paranoid because everybody thought that they were the murderer, and I was capturing this kind of town in the height of the fear, because 5 women had been found dead. you know, no one had been arrested. It's not like London or Manchester, you know, it's a smaller town, so it was like a really big deal. So I was sort of getting some very rich, you know, material. And then Steve Wright was arrested, you know, thank God, because that, you know, he turned out to be the murderer, and that was an end to the killings. But in terms of the story, I was like, I should have got here a bit earlier, because I didn't have quite enough for a whole play. So I sort of put it, kind of, you know, put it in the bottom drawer and thought, oh, well, maybe I'll do something with that at some point. And then a couple of months later, I got invited to do a workshop at the National Theatre. They were trying to generate new musicals. And I told my agent that I was really interested in making a musical. I was like, I don't really like musicals. I always kind of cringe a bit at that moment where they go from speaking into singing. And I was like, oh, I wonder if I could do one that was a bit more sort of, you know, less cringy. And because of the way that I work, which I haven't really explained, is not only do the actors say, you know, the text is created from the real words, the actors actually kind of say it exactly as it was said, you know, so they work from the audio tape, so they're copying the coughs and the stutters, and so it's very sort of super authentic. So I just thought maybe if there's a way to bring that music into that world, you know, it might feel a little bit more based in the real and slightly less sort of, you know, cheesy. And so I went along to this workshop and I took some of this material, not thinking I'd make a musical out of this material, because like that would, it kind of sounds like a really bad idea, right? And I took some other material as well that was another kind of also my non-starters folder, you know, there's lots of those. And I was paired up for some reason, I don't know why, but thankfully, I was paired up with a brilliant Adam Cork composer. And I said, well, listen, I've got all this material and I've got lots of kind of, otherwise would be quite vox poppy material of, you know, men feeling like, you know, they were being the suspects and women being very scared. And so we started, and I realized that what the music did, it kind of glued it together, these otherwise rather kind of disparate, itty-bitty little bits of chat. I could sort of like paste those all together and create choruses. And anyway, by the end of the week, we'd written a few songs, and I was like, oh, and it happened to be announced that the trial of Steve Wright was going to be back in Ipswich the following year. So I was like, okay, and I potentially have an act 2. So it sort of brought the story back. But weirdly, at this point, I was still thinking of telling the story of the whole town. It wasn't called London Road at this point or whatever. It was just kind of like, you know, the Suffolk project. And so it was a year later that the trial was going to be. So I went down in the summer just to kind of see what the mood was like. So this was kind of 6 months after the murder, 6 months before the trial. And I got the local paper. And on the front page was a picture of Julie and her hanging baskets, and basically she was this sort of social secretary of the Neighbourhood Watch, which had formed off the back of the murders on London Road, and London Road was the name of the road where the murderer lived, and it's also where, which had been blighted, it was the red light district. And what had happened, well, what I didn't know at the time, so I was like, oh, that's interesting. They've had a London Road in Bloom competition. So I sort of matched her hanging basket. I went to the road and thought, oh, that looks like the house in the picture, knocked on the door. I said, oh, have you seen you're in the... She said, oh, she hadn't got it, you know, she was all delighted. And she, I think a lot of my work is to do with finding people that want to tell their story. So she was like, great, yes, I want to tell you, look, come in, let's tell you what we've done to this place. Because, you know, I'd gone there 6 months beforehand when he'd been arrested, and most people on that street didn't want to talk to me because obviously they had press all over them, and they didn't want another person going, oh, tell us what's it like living in the red light district. But of course, 6 months later, they'd done a lot to, make the area feel better, and the curb crawlers had been you know, the police had initiated a whole program, and so she was very happy to tell her story. She was like, yes, look, this is what we've done to the road. And I sort of realized, like, oh, okay, that's my in. And rather, my lens, I started focused in, really, they became the central characters at that point. I was like, okay, this is what it's about. This is the story. It's about these people. They formed a neighborhood watch. They're having Christmas parties. They're having quiz nights. And it's because of how they were, you know, maligned in the press, and, you know, the trauma that obviously they didn't go through, obviously what those poor girls' families went through. And, you know, I didn't want to, you know, it wasn't suitable, you know, for me to go, I didn't want to go and inquire and talk to them about that. My lens is always a little bit further away from the whole eye of the storm. But I just thought, this is a part of the story that people don't know about. And that's what, you know, really that's what my work should do, is it should shine a light on maybe a subject that people think they know about, but showing a different side of it. Otherwise, just, you know, read it in the paper and save 50 quid on the theatre ticket. Do you know what I mean? Really? You know, you've got to kind of show it from a slightly different side.
Sure, sure. Wonderful, thank you. Okay, so the last bit of this before we segue, and I'm saving all my big questions for you, Alan, is so drawing this back a little to the sort of systemic level, and we think about sort of the fabric of our society and communities, etc. What are the clues in what we've heard tonight that sort of give us options or opportunities to change, influence that?
Well, I think we've heard lots of things that are of really importance for understanding that, and really good examples. I think the fear that people have of speaking, they're more afraid of that than they're of dying. Everyone can relate to that. But I think we might want to ask, well, why is that? Where's that coming from? Because actually, we articulate from birth naturally and easily and confidently. Something goes wrong to tell us to hide that voice, or most of us. Some people are encouraged to use their voice and trained regularly in their expensive schools to learn how to do so. So part of it is kind of saying, yeah, actually you can do. Just saying you can do it, just as we found out, inviting people. Once you give people that space and that opportunity and that permission, they begin to step forward. But also what you're saying, people who are maybe not fully under the glare of the news headlines, but moving aside, and people whose stories aren't getting heard. Once you begin to pay attention to them, then you begin to hear these kinds of things. And I think from the work we've done, what I would say, maybe a bit more formally, I mean, when I'm with Josephine and we're with people in wherever it is, in a prison or a difficult part of Sheffield or something, usually maybe when someone like me, by which I mean someone who studies politics professionally, usually if someone like me is in that context, it's probably firstly maybe to do a focus group, which is not really to find out what people think, it's how they might think about something specific for some particular thing. So I'm not really interested in them, I want to know what they say about this other thing. Or maybe a bit more elaborate, it's a sort of citizens' jury type thing, which is fine, but it's then making them think about a particular thing that someone else has decided is important. This is what we want you to talk about. This is what the news or the politicians have said is important. And what I found very powerful about what the work of Josephine was people chose what they wanted to talk about. All we said was tell me something that you think we can do, an action that was important, it was about an action, that you think would make the world better in some way. Yeah. And it can be big, but it can be something small. You don't have to talk about the things that are in the news. And that was what immediately unlocked people to say, do this with first aid, or help us with this neurodiverse issue, or change the speed of the beeps on the lights. I can't walk that fast. Mm-hmm. Whatever it was, from small things to big things about poverty and universal credit. Yeah. So it was giving people that permission. And part of what we did, we never really formally agreed on it, but I certainly made it as a sort of vow of my own, was I will help people write a speech about whatever they choose, and I won't stop them. Yeah. Which is a risky thing in some respects. If they pick a thing I really don't want to help them with, or that might be difficult for their group. But the thing is, that didn't happen. And I think that didn't happen for the second reason, which was because we were then teaching them speech-making rhetoric, which is similar to the stories that you're talking about, but a little bit different, because we're saying, now you've got to make a persuasive speech. You know, I want to be moved, and I want to be informed, but can you persuade me? And that's a bit different. And so the risk there is that you say to people, don't tell it like you would tell it, don't use your own voice, I'll give you a voice. And that's part of what goes wrong. People think they have to adopt a voice and sound like a politician. And who wants to sound like a politician? So part of what we would say to people is, when we mean a political, it isn't a political speech just because Keir Starmer or KB Badenoch gives it. They give lots of speeches that are not political speeches. They're just other kinds of talk. You're giving speeches about things we could do. You haven't got to say all the things politicians say, all the cliches, you know. It is right to say that. I mean, who says that? You know, what I would say to you, no, none of that. It wasn't about that. It was, you can say it in your voice, but we'll just help you structure it. And then the key thing so rhetoric has a bad reputation as being empty or misleading speech. But really all it means is speech that you shape with your audience in mind, which I figure you get as writers and artists. So I would say to people, explain it to me. I don't know what it's like to be in prison or to be deaf or to be living in Sheffield. Yeah, I'm not an idiot. I know what it's like to be alive, but I don't know what it's like to be you. Explain it to me. What do I need to know? So that's asking people to just look a little bit outside, not forget who they are, not forget that story, but direct that out and explain it to someone else. And then when it comes so they then explain the situation, what's the problem you want to solve? Okay, now can you tell me why I should think your solution's going to work? I might think that's a lovely idea, but I don't think we could ever do it. So explain to me how we could do it. And then tell me why that might be good for me as well as you and for other people. Can you do that? And people responded to that. I was surprised. Responded to that really quickly and went off and would find out things and find out facts and things like this. The women in the prison wanted to know, suddenly asked, how much does it cost to keep me here? And they couldn't look at the computers, but they sent the guy who was in charge of the class to go in, and he comes back in looking shocked and says, it's £49,950. And everyone's, what, really? And then someone says, how much do they spend on mental health per year? And he goes away and he comes back and he says, £350. And the whole room is like, so now people have discovered a fact, which is shaping their arguments, and then they're communicating that fact in the context of their stories and experiences while saying, if we spent a bit more on mental health problems, I wouldn't be in prison and you wouldn't have to pay for me £49,500. So that for me was the big thing, was getting people to move out and speak in these different kinds of ways. And part of that was about me not imposing a voice and about me learning to listen to people and not be the expert, not be a pretend sort of person. You know, I'm still there and I have views and would say them, but listening to that and wanting to know what people had to say. So validating their story, letting them do that, giving people a structure and saying, just turn it around and how can you present that to me? And then Josephine comes in and helps with the delivery, what you're clearly excellent at, as well as teaching delivery and how you kind of present yourself. And people, and I don't want to oversell it, like everyone didn't come out with an Obama speech, but I think everybody felt, even when it wasn't brilliant, they felt they'd had the opportunity, and that somebody, and that was the really powerful thing for me, was, you know, they felt that someone had come and genuinely wanted to, which I did. I genuinely wanted to know what they had to say, and that was part of, I think, what was valuable.
Great. Well, we are privileged tonight because we have Sue Ajaka, who took part in an R Public House workshop in Newham in East London. And she has very kindly agreed to share a speech that she developed there. So I'm going to welcome Sue to the stage. And,
Thank you, Tom. So, just a tiny bit of context. I just arrived at this workshop, and it was a bit of an irresistible invitation, because actually, on an average day, nobody wants to know what you think or what you're passionate about, and I think that was the motivation for me. So, just think about earlier this year, we had a general election. So this is pre-election. And at the time, I was hearing things that people were saying in work and in my private life. You know, I was just getting hints of people saying, oh, we're not going to vote because it's not going to make any difference. And I knew people who'd sort of resigned themselves to say, you know, I'm not going to bother because nothing's going to change. So that was on my mind when I arrived to do the workshop, and that's where this comes from. So some of the references are think about at the time, yeah? So this is a few months ago, earlier in 2024. So, friends, switch on your telly, turn on your phone, or flick through a newspaper, and what jumps out at you? Chances are it's the person who has sussed how best to grab your attention, who gets the most attention, gets their agenda on the table, and gets to have their voice heard. Our politics today is the archetype of this game. If we believe in democracy, if we believe that a better system is one in which everyone's voice matters, if we actually believe things can get better, then the rules of the game have to change. And here's a number, 29.1%. That's how many people turned up to vote in Newham, where I live, in a recent local election. 29.1. In 2022, when you think that we all had something to shout about. 29.1. That doesn't sound great for Newham, but it's not great anywhere. In fact, across the country, 30% is about the norm. And that, friends, is the emergency. 70% of us are either disenfranchised or are disenfranchising ourselves. This needs to change. So what can we do? Behind these numbers, friends, there are real people. I think of my neighbor, an elderly senior citizen who's lived a life of experiences some of us can only imagine. They've seen challenges and change, triumph and tragedy. Their very presence enriches all of us. Their nuggets of wisdom are priceless. But they're also frail and housebound, have no digital devices, no visitors, and struggle to stay connected, cut off from the digital world, and so cut off from our democratic process today. Now, imagine in your neighborhood, everyone knows the date, say the 1st of June, for a meeting with our local councillor. Everyone, every citizen can attend. Everyone can bring a problem forward. Anyone can propose solutions. I'm there, so is my elderly neighbor. They struggle to get out, so we go together. We both care about what happens in our locality because it affects us, and we'll be able to see the impact we can have by showing up. We can hold our local politicians to account, and the councillor is mandated to take the challenges and the solutions forward. This could happen across the country so that each neighborhood has a meaningful relationship with local politics. And that, in turn, will have an impact on the national scene. We have the wards, we have the structures. We, the people, just need to use them differently. Now you're probably thinking, yeah, this is pie in the sky, impossible, not doable, but change is always possible. 10 years ago, we made it possible to have gay marriage. We didn't think it was, but people made it happen. Until 1969, you had to be 21 to vote. But the age came down to 18 because people made it happen. We can do politics differently. We can make it happen. We can meet in our local neighborhoods. We can engage in a way that welcomes everyone's voice. We can hold our local politicians to account. Today, friends, I issue an invitation to all of us to reclaim the franchise, to show up on the 2nd of May and vote. Let's rethink together how we can make our politics work for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sue. That was extraordinary. Thank you. So, some of you may have noticed that we are close to the allotted time here, but we do have time maybe for one question and then perhaps a sort of set of very short final remarks from each of our panelists. So is there anyone in the audience? I've got someone here. Maybe we'll take two, but then we'll go for a very short final remark each. So as pithy as possible, if possible. Sorry for that.
Thanks very much, Titus Alexander. That was inspiring from all of you and the last one, because you're quite right. We are in a democratic emergency. And I'm really glad to see somebody from a university who's escaped from the ivory tower and is doing something about it, because universities have the potential to be agencies for democracy and support people. So what can we do more to, if you like, get universities to support local communities and helping their voice and working with partners as you're doing here?
Fantastic. And then we'll go up here for the final one.
Thank you very much, everyone. I imagine you will all have a view on this question, but I wonder if I might ask Alecky about what you put in place to protect the people whose stories are being shared, beyond them giving you permission, because I think what people don't realise when they say you have permission is if it's in a theatre, suddenly it's something they might not have expected or given license for. So what do you put in place ethically to protect people, and also for your artistic freedom, so that you can make the work that you want to make?
Should we start with you, Alecky, very quickly, and then we'll go to...
So, yeah, if there are things that they say that I think, yeah, I think, how are they going to feel about that? I will kind of go back to them and say, because often the play goes on so many, a couple of years maybe after I've done the interview, and they may have forgotten, they may whatever. So I have gone back and said, so you said this. It's probably maybe, quite a controversial thing in the piece, and it stands out a bit, whatever. I think it's really important. I'd love to keep it. Are you still okay with it? I mean, I have done that. Hoping, oh my God, I really hope they don't retract it, because at the end of the day, I'm just making a play, and it's their lives that, they will go on living, and a lot of people will see the play, hopefully, and there could be potentially an impact, and I wouldn't want there to be a negative impact. So, I just have to kind of keep a check of, with my moral compass, I guess, and I just, I'm just kind of guided by that. And often in rehearsals, I sort of think, I've kind of got the director here wanting to kind of jazz things up a bit, and then I've got the real life people here, and I'm kind of in the middle, trying to kind of keep everyone happy. Like, okay, I've got to imagine that the real life people are in, watching it every night. If I imagine that, it sort of helps me keep on track.
Can I quickly just add, because I've been thinking a lot about this in the context of our public house, the production that we're making, inspired by and informed by all the speeches. And the speeches have informed the characters, but they are not the characters in our fictional drama when it gets to the stage next in 2026 will be fictional. However, wherever we go as we travel the country, the real people who've given these speeches will be in our show. So there's going to be, at the beginning of the second act, every night, there will be these 2 little slots where we will be able to stage and invite to the stage people like Sue, who I hope will be in our showing when we come to London in 2026. So we're actually, we will look after them and support them and continue to work with them between now and 2026. So it won't be an actor playing that character. It will be, it will be Sue at her own, if she's up for gracing the stage again, will be in the show as herself. So because I think these people, they're extraordinary, and we need to give real people the platform to be heard.
Fantastic. Alan, maybe the question on universities.
Yes, thank you for that question. Thank you very much. And so I'm duty-bound in the present context to say, don't make us redundant. The first thing. There's a major redundancy crisis all over the country, my university included, so defending universities. But of course, part of that is us defending ourselves by showing that what we do matters. That challenges in universities are particularly directed at, well, the sciences too, but particularly social sciences, humanities, arts, my subjects. Now, what you've heard Sue deliver so excellently and what we teach is nothing more nor less than the structure of the Roman classical oration. It's what Caesar did, it's what Cicero did. So it's seemingly the most recondite kind of up in the clouds historical thing, absolutely relevant to the present day, works and is of benefit, and is absolutely not elitist because it's helping anybody do those things. So it's partly us making that case, but others being open to us making that case that what we do is not elitist, and pushing on that side of things. And finally, there is a growing groundswell for the development of what is called the civic university, which is, as you say, universities, particularly in towns like mine in Norwich, where the university is a key economic and cultural player, being part of the communities that they are involved in. Most of us would like to do that. So do Google Civic University and see the kind of work people are doing. And yeah, in your broader political lives and social lives, come to those events and help us, help you, help each other, and be part of the communities that we're in.
Fantastic. And Dawid, bring us home. A final thought on all of this.
I think one of the things that I've discovered, which has been very heartwarming over the years, is that with people who tend to be younger, so maybe in their 20s, I do most of my work with people in their 20s, a lot of them start out, when we're doing a Spellbound series, very discombobulated with life and riddled with fear and anxiety, and I mean, I had that when I was very young. I had the same sort of things, but now I think it's exacerbated. You benchmark yourselves against all your friends who are on Instagram or Facebook, and they're all so beautiful, and they've got so much money, and they seem to be able to eat out in places that you can't afford. They can pay the rent, pay the mortgage, all that sort of stuff. And so where do I fit into it all? And it's all very disconcerting, and high levels of anxiety and lack of confidence. And this I found, it's a very simple thing, but just exactly as everyone's been talking about, giving people the confidence to say, this is who I am, this is how I fit into the world, is an amazing gift. Because someone once said, I remember someone telling me that you're comfortable in life, you're not comfortable, you're in a good place if you have a sense of how the world works. A lot of people just don't, this world is kind of crazy. I just don't really understand how it works with all its uncertainties and all its there's about a VUCA world with volatility, uncertainty, complexity and ambiguity, and that's never been greater. But understanding how the world works is half of it. But then understanding how I fit into that world is the second bit. And if I get that, then suddenly I can breathe a bit and the anxiety starts to subside. And when you give people the ability to stand up and speak in public and say, this is who I am, this is my story, this is the story I want to tell, in forming that story, I have to kind of figure out how the world works and how I fit into it, or at least I begin that journey. And suddenly it's amazing how the confidence arrives. And so it's a big thing. Giving people the civic voice is just a huge, huge thing. And when the riots were kicking off, earlier this year, and I remember, watching these scenes of people mindlessly throwing, it wasn't mindless, but it was just this sort of huge, bubbling, roiling rage as they were throwing bins through Greggs. And we all saw it and were kind of horrified. And I was just thinking, I remember we'd just done a Spellbound course, and I just thought, wouldn't it be amazing if up and down the land, instead of throwing bins through shop windows, people were instead engaged in discourse, and there was civic conversation. And you may disagree with me, but this is what I think. Why don't we learn to listen to each other and to exchange views? Wouldn't that be an incredible thing? Yeah. And I think, who knows? I mean, that's my vision for Spellbound, and talking to these guys. I mean, it could be a thing. And I love that you've put this on, and thanks so much for inviting me. It's been great. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And thanks everyone for coming. It has been a really fantastic session. The fact that we have been so pressed for time, I think, is testament to that. And for everyone online who's been watching with us, thank you for your comments and questions, and I apologise for not getting to any of them. If you are an RSA Fellow, you can keep the conversation going on our digital platform Circle. So click through to the link that you'll see posted online now, and you'll be taken through to the dedicated chat. And you can give your thoughts on everything that you've heard today. And finally, a huge thank you to our brilliant speakers, Josephine, Alan, Alecky, Dawid, and Sue. Thank you all. It's been a real pleasure. A round of applause, please. Very good.